this week's podcast, Business Success in a Virtual World. We're glad to be with you today, Barton Goldenberg and I, to share with you some pretty interesting things. As if you followed our podcast, you know that each week we focus on some kind of a case study. And today we actually are going to do a pretty good one on Northrop Grumman. But before we go into that case study, I'd be remiss to not point out that we're talking to you and taping this 2 days after Apple introduced their new Vision Pro AR headset. I was in one of the unique positions to be able to actually test it and use it and go through not only the demo, but actually interact with the applications. And to be honest with you, I've seen a lot of demos in my life. This is one of the first where I walked out of the room and I said, oh my goodness, this is the future of computing. In a column I wrote for Forbes, I bring out the fact that in reality, I believe Apple has just reinvented the personal computer. But I wanted to point out that this particular announcement from Apple, I believe, is a game changer, and it's a disruptive technology. At the same time, I want to be really clear here that it's very early in the cycle, and yet you can see its potential. Next week or two, when Barton and I taped the next section of the podcast, we're actually going to do a deeper dive on Apple's Vision Pro, and more specifically, how it can be used to do successful business in a virtual world, and especially looking at things like sales, marketing, promotions, etc. I would like also to bring up that we already have on our Metaverse Resource Center site, ismguide.com/Metaverse Resource Center, or you can go straight to ismguide.com and it's on the front page. Over 190 case studies, or close to 190 case studies, of companies already doing VR and using VR and AR in business applications today. What Apple's going to fundamentally do is make it even more available to bigger audiences and give them even greater tools. And in our next podcast, we'll go into that. Barton, we actually met somebody from Northrop Grumman at the AWE conference last week in Santa Clara. And today, that particular company is the focus of Barton's case study. So Barton, why don't you share a little bit about that, and then we'll come back and talk about Apple.
Well, thank you, Tim. And I'm sure not just myself, but all of us will look forward to the next podcast as well on the very important Apple Vision Pro announcement. But today, let's talk about another B2B case study. So for those that are regularly following our podcast, we opened up with the story of Procter & Gamble, B2C. We've also done the Walmart case study, again, B2C. We did the Siemens case study, B2B. Today, Northrop Grumman is B2B. And we've done JP Morgan, which is a B2B2C. So we're trying to mix it up, and we're turning back to the B2B today. And I'm going to focus on how Northrop Grumman leverages virtual reality in the design and testing of its engineering products. So for those that may be familiar, Northrop Grumman Corporation, it's an American multinational aerospace and defense technology company. It's headquartered in Los Angeles, California, with annual revenues exceeding $37 billion US, which puts them at number 101 in the Fortune 500 list last year. In 1994, Northrop Corporation acquired Grumman Aerospace, and that's what resulted in the creation of the Northrop Grumman Corporation, although the firm's history goes well beyond those original two companies that were founded by Jack Northrop in 1939 and Leroy Grumman in 1929. In fact, today's Northrop Grumman is a result of the integration of over 20 pioneering companies from across the aerospace, technology, and defense industries. Now, Northrop Grumman is one of the world's largest weapons manufacturer and military technology providers, with approximately 95,000 employees globally, with more than 550 facilities in all 50 US states and in more than 25 countries around the world. Northrop Grumman is made up of 4 businesses: aeronautic systems, defense systems, mission systems, and space systems. And its products within those particular sectors include military aircraft and unmanned aerial vehicles, also known as drones, military vessels, missile and missile defense systems, autocannons, chain guns and munitions, satellite and space, information technology, electronic sensor and systems, and rocket launch systems. Northrop Grumman's many accomplishments include its pioneering work in the Apollo space program, in the lunar module that landed a man on the moon, the B-2 stealth bomber that it maintains for the US Air Force, and the latest drone technology. Now, when you design a satellite or the interior of a spacecraft or any of the other offerings they do, creating a prototype is critical to help the engineer evaluate and improve the design of that particular offering. But it's not feasible to test these designs in outer space. And that's why Northrop Grumman, a few years ago, turned to three-dimensional virtual reality, also called VR, which facilitates their engineers to bring outer space closer to home by seeing their designs in action prior to putting them into production. Using the VR tools for spaceflight is relatively new. In the early days, NASA engineers and technicians would scrutinize design details using a two-dimensional drawing and a group of calculation sheets. Now that evolved into what is today computer-aided design, or CAD models, that led to full-size physical mock-ups that were built from wood or metal. But the CAD designs were still limited by their two-dimensional screen. To overcome that constraint, engineers at Northrop Grumman created 3D CAD renderings, which in minutes allows the engineer to convert the file for virtual reality, put on a virtual reality headset, and then examine a full-scale model in extraordinary detail. And because the VR headsets are lightweight and work wirelessly, engineers have the flexibility as well as the freedom to walk entirely around, for example, a spacecraft or a piece of military hardware, examining both it from the inside as well as from the outside. And because virtual reality renders details so precise and realistically, engineers can view design details to include literally the threads on a bolt, the twists in a wire, and the embossed identification labels on a component. Let me share with you 3 examples of how Northrop Grumman is currently leveraging VR technology in their day-to-day business. So the first example, I'm going to highlight Northrop Grumman's digital shadow testbed, which is a digital replica, or also referred to as a digital twin, of their CRJ-700 test aircraft. Now, by creating a digital twin of this aircraft, and remember, it's a testing aircraft, Northrop Grumman can evaluate mission systems virtually and rapidly collect valuable system data that's needed to drive enhancements. For example, Northrop Grumman can test digital representations of a fighter radar on the actual aircraft in the digital shadow testbed while collecting valuable performance data to enhance the radar design. Northrop Grumman can also create scenarios and sensor combinations that go well beyond the physical testbed limitation, thus increasing the breadth and scale of experimentation while reducing the timeline, the flight test costs, and also the risk. In a second example, I want to look for a minute at how Northrop Grumman applies virtual reality techniques to help design a new intermediary class rocket in response to questions that were raised by their customers. And one of those questions had to do with the batteries that had to be replaced in a rocket just before the launch while the rocket was still on the launch pad. These batteries weigh 25 pounds each, and the design requires that they be installed or removed through a small access door. During the design review, the engineers simulated the battery installation in the VR environment using a 25-pound dumbbell. And the VR design review quickly showed the engineer and the customers who were watching this review that the currently planned battery access panel was placed in a very awkward location, making it difficult to perform the battery exchange. The VR simulated environment helped the engineers to redesign this battery hanger system to allow for easy swapping out of batteries while the rocket was on the launch pad. In the third reference or example, I want to reference Northrop Grumman's virtual reality lab located close to my home in Dulles, Virginia, where engineers leverage VR technology by slipping on a VR headset to test the feasibility of procedures such as operating a robotic arm in space or cleaning the module in a zero-gravity environment. This helps the engineers to evaluate and prove their design, which then they create into a 3D printed mock-up prototype, which then gets reviewed by the design team. So those are three examples, and it would be my observation that Northrop Grumman's VR technology programs, these and several others, have delivered many benefits to the firm. Some examples: design engineers can evaluate and improve engineering designs and answer questions with increased speed and agility. Very importantly, the use of digital twins reduces the time to test and deploy new designs, and it takes it down from years to literally hours. The VR design and testing also improves real-time outcomes on the battlefield, where, for example, agile and networked warfighters can adapt in real time to changing adversaries' tactics, techniques, and technologies. Now, Northrop Grumman knows that leveraging VR and other virtual world technologies requires putting stakes in the ground and then keeping up to date on the latest technologies. That's the commitment they've made. It also might explain why Northrop Grumman created a very interesting internal position called the Principal Investigator for XR Technologies. I'm curious, Tim, to learn how Northrop Grumman will apply Apple's Vision Pro to these efforts in the future, but I think we'll have to wait for that. Now, as Tim alluded to review this and more than 180 other VR, AR, and Metaverse case studies, do be sure to visit ISM's Metaverse Resource Center. As Tim said, it can be reached from www.ismguide.com or ism.com/metaverse-resource-center. And also to learn how and why these technologies will change everything. I would ask you to consider attending one of our 2-hour ISM executive briefings, where we'll take the executives through how others are using these technologies, competitors are using these technologies, a roadmap for getting started in these technologies. Well, Tim, with that in mind, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Barton, this Northrop Grumman case is really fascinating because not only did they use the technology to fine-tune the designs, but in some cases, I'm sure they actually used it in the sales process to show that they are capable of creating a solution for, in this case, NASA or the military or whoever. We've been working on the Metaverse site for 2 years, and we consistently are amazed at how many companies are already using the technology. They just were early adopters, but realistically, they are fundamentally rewriting some of the rules of business as a result of integrating this technology. And they're staying ahead of their customers. They're being more competitive. and they're providing better solutions for their customers.
Yeah, Tim,
That's why that metaverse, like,
I want to pick up just 1 minute on what you said, Tim, on the showing their customers. So, Northrop Grumman and many of the other aerospace and military companies sell to the U.S. government, to military branches of the U.S. government, to NASA and other such administrations. And you are correct. When Northrop Grumman can bring an executive from NASA into their VR center in Dulles, Virginia, and have them put on the glasses and see how how Northrop Grumman is developing and engineering the products, and how they can do the quality control, and how they can test various scenarios, and the customer can have some say in what if we did this versus that. What you're doing in a classical CRM sense is you're engaging with the customer in a way that will drive loyalty, it'll drive customer satisfaction, it'll even drive customer advocacy. So in addition to helping Northrop Grumman achieve internal efficiencies, they're also able to greatly improve their likelihood of being the selected vendor by carefully integrating the customer in each step of the development process.
yeah, again, it's a fascinating case, especially is represented as an enterprise case, but part of not only sales and design, but it would affect their operations too. Um, as I mentioned earlier, I actually got to see and test the Apple Vision Pro headset. And I literally walked away totally blown away. And if you look at some of the reviews of the people who got to see it, they're fundamentally saying the same thing. Yes, there's questions about price. Yes, there's questions about some of their market focus. But at this stage of the game, Apple really has created what I call the next personal computer. In fact, in the piece that I just wrote for Forbes, it was published on Monday, I actually stated Apple's Vision Pro reinvents the personal computer. And as I used it, I kept sitting there thinking, oh my God. And the response to it was just beyond anything I could think of, because it was that outstanding. Now, having said that, I am giving you a perspective of one who was actually there at the keynote, and I was there on campus to actually see the demo. So I may be a little bit biased because I had the hands-on. At the same time, I'm probably a bit more informed than people who just watched it. But Barton, I'm just interested. You sat through the entire keynote back in your home in Bethesda, Maryland. What was your reaction when you watched it?
Yeah, I was also greatly impressed. And I'll tell you what, a couple things that stood out in my mind. When Tim Cook said that this is the first time that you're going to look through an Apple product rather than looking at an Apple product, that really changed the landscape. And then I also think about those 180 case studies that sit in the Metaverse Resource Center that did not have the ability to use, for example, this Apple Vision Pro. And I think about all of the money, time, and effort that was spent by various VR, AR, MR, XR vendors to create software that was unique to that particular application. And I think about what Apple is trying to do in terms of creating a separate Apple store where you can go and purchase or download the Apple Vision Pro apps. And so what I envisage for all of my customers and all those that are in the Metaverse Resource Center case studies is you can go in to the Apple store for the I think they're going to call it the Apple Vision Pro store. And you can say, I'd like to use a remote assist application to link my company or my whatever, my customer service group with a situation that's happening in America or overseas. And I want to try to fix it using, we'll both put on the Vision Pro glasses and we'll fix that together. So no longer do we need to go to a particular vendor that's tied to a set of glasses or a particular approach, but we have that in the Apple Store. And what I envisage is hundreds, if not thousands, of AR, VR, mixed reality, extended reality applications ending up inside the Apple Store, the new Apple Store for Vision Pro, and the ability now to be able to be get up and running to create a prototype in the metaverse or in of the virtual world more quickly, more cost effectively, and with a greater level of sophistication. So I think that Apple Store is fantastic. The other thing that stood out in my mind was the announcement that this is now going to work in conjunction with Unity, which, as many of you know, is a core platform, maybe the core platform amongst a few others for the gaming industry. And what we know is that Unity is the platform of choice with its extended capabilities, Tim, that you know far better than I do. But that then will be transformed and available through the Apple Vision Pro, and that will be extended by the developers to develop new apps for sales, for marketing, for customer service, for training, for design. So we're really opening up a whole new approach to doing virtual worlds better, quicker, and in a better way. So in that regard, I was thrilled to death with all that was said. And I think seriously, when Igor, the CEO of Disney, came on during the presentation and said that he has had the Vision Pro on, and he was so impressed with its capability to see in 3D and create in 3D and all the benefits that Tim Cook and Apple showed, that he's committed Disney to being a partner and lots of apps early on when this particular product gets launched in 2024. So I can only say, Tim, I see this as a paradigm shift. You're not looking at an apple, you're looking through an apple, and it changes the whole concept of, if you said, of the personal computer, or in the words of Tim Cook, of spatial computing.
Yeah, it really is, I think, a seminal time in computing. And it's in the column that I wrote, I mentioned that, Apple seems to be the one who does that on a consistent basis. I mean, they did it with the Mac, they did it with the iPhone and the iPod. They've done it with the iPad, and most recently with the watch. All of them have become major advances in some form of personal computing. And it's hard to argue that their historical success will not be translated here. Now, again, one of the ways I kind of think of this first headset, which is a little bit bulky, although I got to tell you, when I wore it, it was really easy to use. It was highly intuitive. I learned how to use it within a minute, and it was very comfortable on my head because of the adjustments. But a friend of mine made an interesting comment, and he said, in one sense, think of this a little bit more like the Lisa. The Lisa that Apple created was really the first computer with a graphical interface, but it was a big box. It was huge, and it was ridiculously expensive. 3 years later, Apple comes out with the Mac in this tiny, compact little system, and they had downsized the Lisa and created the Mac. And I suspect that this first product here, in its current form, is representing something that's going to be very valuable, and a lot of people are going to want to use it even with its current size. But knowing Apple, they'll not only get the size down and the price down over the next 2 or 3 years, they'll get it to the place where it's more valuable to not only the enterprise today, but eventually the mass or the bigger market. Come back in our next podcast. We'll designate that time just for this as it relates to business success in virtual worlds. And we'll actually talk a little bit more about the role of this in what Tim Cook called spatial computing. But I was thinking as I watched this demo, God, I'm glad I'm still alive. I get to see advancements in tech that are beyond what I would call science fiction. And if you told me even 5 years ago that we would be doing these kind of things in a single device, I would have questioned it. But I had experienced it, you know. And even at $3,500, yeah, it'll be a limited amount of people who can either afford it or use it. But I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of people who will actually find the money to buy it.
Well, next week when we talk about how our vision of how to apply the Apple Vision Pro to sales, marketing, customer service, training, and a few other business applications, I'm going to argue, I can tell you in advance, that the price tag, which I think will come down, but anyhow, even if it were to stay as it is actually a very cost-effective way to solve all kinds of issues, and that the cost is not going to be something that's going to stop companies from jumping onto Apple Vision Pro and applying it to their business needs.
Yeah. Well, with that, we'll let you know that, as I said, the next time we come back to you, we're going to deviate just a tad from our sharing case studies. We're going to zero in specifically on how the Vision Pro we think is going to impact, business success in virtual worlds. And with that, we will bid you adieu for this time, and we look forward to you not only continuing to enjoy these podcasts, but ones in the future. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tim.